Professor Basu. Before inviting Professor Sarkar to chair the session, I will request all of you to switch off your video and mute yourself. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box and we will take them up at the end of the lecture. I now hand over the charge of the session to Professor Abhirup Sarkar. Abhirup.
Thank you, Moshumi. For me, it's an emotional moment, actually. Of course, the speaker is Kaushik, who always ventures out of the traditional boundaries of economics to delve into questions which are still unanswered but very important. And he will do that again. There is no question of introducing him. Everyone knows him. I'll just take 1 or 2 minutes to speak on Professor Dipak Banerjee. Dipak Banerjee was, of course, my teacher of our generation, teacher of generations of students after me and before me. But more important, he was a teacher in more than one sense. Of course, he taught us economics. He took great care to introduce us to the finer nuances of economic theory, and he really did care about his students. That's, of course, there. But apart from being a teacher of economics, he taught us to take pleasure into the finer things that life has offered us in a very broad sense. He used to talk about Sandesh and mangoes and Hindustani classical music. So in short, he taught us how to live as an intelligent citizen of this world. I will just end with one very small anecdote. A friend of mine, a classmate of mine, we were in second year at that time. He had gone to a music festival just before the exam. Next day was the exam, and quite unexpectedly, he met Dipak Babu there in the intermission, and he was very scared. Dipak Babu called him. He was very scared, but Dipak Babu said, "Look, can you look there in that direction? Can you see that person in white kurta? That's Ustad Amir Khan, the greatest living vocalist of Indian classical music. Take a look at him. You will never get this opportunity to, take a look at him from such a close distance." So that was Dipak Babu. He taught us so many other things. I have so many stories about Dipak Babu. I have to stop. I have to stress myself to stop. I will hand over to Kaushik Da, and we all are waiting eagerly to hear him. Thank you very
much. Abhirup, thank you very, very much. I should also thank Moshumi and others for the invitation to give the Dipak Banerjee Memorial Lecture. I'm presuming Abhijit is there, Nirmala is there. My best wishes to you, best wishes to the students who are there and the professors attending. Abhirup, you took words out of my mouth when, since this morning, as I've been thinking of this literature at this occasion and the lecture. Of course, it is for me a great honor to give the lecture. But even more than the honor is a sense of warmth and belonging that is an overwhelming sense. As I join all of you on this occasion, I never studied at Presidency College. In fact, after school, I left Kolkata. But my occasional return there, my meeting with Dipak Da, there all comes in an overwhelming way into my mind as I was thinking about today's lecture. And the sense of warmth and belonging.
Echo
Do I need to do anything to prevent? আমার কি কিছু করার দরকার?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
You solve the technical problem.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry.
No problem. And I was going to say that lots of memories of Dipak comes in, and I should tell you just one or two. The first time I heard about Dipak, I had not met him since, as I said, I left Kolkata early, was from my teacher at the London School of Economics, Max Stoyer. Max Stoyer used to describe this very, very colorful Indian professor. And Max Stoyer would go to meet him when I think Dipak was a visiting professor at the London School of Economics. And Max would go to meet him. And Max would describe this just great elegance, the charm meeting Dipak in his office and having long conversations with him. He had worked as a laborer. He was a professor, a very, very colorful life. I remember lots of meetings in Kolkata, at their home with Dipak and Nirmaladi, long conversations with Dipak, and erudition, which Obhirup just referred to, was just writ large. I mean, it was not just economics we talked about, but it would be music, it would be food, and not the food of a hotel, but food of a small village in West Bengal where you get a special kind of party shop. There's another place where you get another special kind of food. Dipak knew it all. I mean, he took in life in that style. It was, in many ways, I was thinking it was a darbari style without having a darbar, which is the ideal. I mean, if you have that feudal charm and elegance without being a feudal lord, that's the ideal, and that represented that. And one more word I must say is when I joined the Delhi School of Economics, the teaching that was done by Mihir Rokit, it was a remarkable group at Presidency College. I could feel how powerful this was from the admission test that we would do at the Delhi School of Economics. It would be completely dominated by the students of Presidency College. And the Delhi School's admission process was quite a flawless process. There was no interference and use of influence. And we would look at the admission test. It would be so dominated by Presidency College that with genuinely thinking in terms of affirmative action, we would think that we have to draw a line somewhere and give a little bit of grace to the rest to catch up with that. That was Presidency College in those days, and the memories for me from the Delhi School of Economics, watching from afar, go back to that. I should just tell you one more thing. Dipak writing style. Dipak did not write very much. It was the old style intellectual, sitting in the agora and conversing with people. That was Dipak's style. But the few papers, in Economica, one of my early influences was Choice and Order of First Things First. Just a beautiful paper about John Hicks, one of the missed axioms in Hicks. But I've read him also once or twice in Bangla. He was a person who was a gifted writer, a natural writer. He did not have to make any special effort to do that. So let me, with that, say this is a great occasion for me and jump right into my topic today. I will actually, since the PowerPoint is someone else is presenting and I'm doing the talking, what I thought I'm going to do is have use the PowerPoint only minimally, where I absolutely need it for a little bit of a game that I'm going to show. So for now, you can do without the PowerPoint, and I will tell you when the PowerPoint is needed. What I'm going to talk about today is something which is my current research, and it is to do with, broadly, the role of morality in economic life. And I use a light game theory to illustrate some of the problems. And since I'm assuming that there are many students who are listening to this, I do want to use the game theory to give a sense of how you can tackle some of these problems. Most of it will remain unsolved, but that is the way life is. Solved problems are semi-solved. You get into them, you try to solve, you grapple with them, you solve some, you don't solve others. Morality, I think, is important for two reasons. One is the contemporary world. It does trouble me. I have to say, the world, the situation in India does trouble me. We are fractured, we are divided, we are partitioned in a way that I have not seen before. Growing up in India, I know that there were, of course, divisions, there were struggles, but there was an effort at inclusiveness, which was a remarkable effort. And it showed up. I remember people coming from the West, coming to India and getting taken aback by the quality of free speech and open debate that used to occur in India. You can stand up in the middle of the street and air your opinions about the leaders, about the followers, about anyone. There would be heated debates, but it would remain at the level of debates largely. I'm not exaggerating, there were violations, but there was the camaraderie that was there. It is eroding. And I'm also puzzled about growth slowing down. And I'm not talking of the COVID period or the immediately after the COVID period. If you go back to earlier 4 years, 5 years, for 4 years, from 2016, India has had 4 years of each year's growth being less than the previous year's growth from 2016 to 2020. Each year's growth is less than the previous year's growth. So many consecutive years of downward growth has not happened ever before since 1947. I've looked at the data from 1947. It has not happened before. What is causing this? I don't think it is a faltering of usual policies like fiscal policy or monetary policy. My own guess is this is happening because of an erosion of trust and some of the basic morality, like nuts and bolts of society, that are getting weakened. And there is an important space in the economy of moral compass, and I will come in a moment what I mean by morality. I'm not talking in terms of following a religion or practicing a religion, but just some of the rules of ethical behavior, empathy, kindness, integrity. I feel some of these things play a very, very major role, and we are not giving enough importance to this. So this is a topic that is of importance to India. This is a topic that is of importance to the world. And one more thing, I will point to some of the challenges, because after you recognize the importance of ethics and morality in everyday life, not as an end in itself, but really for the economy, still it's not an easily solved problem. I will illustrate with some paradoxes some of the challenges that crop up when you try to do this, take into account the moral problem. Let me go back a little bit to economic history and plunge into the main content of my talk. Modern economics, the way we know it, comes from Adam Smith, 1776. Important works after that, but I'm coming to that in a moment. Adam Smith's main finding, which I think is a stunningly important finding, which can be misused, which can be misread, and which can be genuinely misunderstood. This is the invisible hand. Adam Smith's realization that the order that we see around us, even if you look around in the midst of the chaos of everyday life, there's a lot of order. The food that you want does arrive, or you can go and buy it. The clothes that you want to wear, someone else has made those clothes, you go and acquire those clothes. How does it all run? Is there a central authority that manages this? In the earlier times, you would tend to think that someone is doing that. Either a god or a leader, someone is bringing about this kind of order. Adam Smith's insight was that, no, maybe you don't need anyone at the top. This can happen. A lot of this can happen automatically. Each person going about his or her own chores, trying to maximize whatever the person wants to maximize, can bring about an order. Of course, there are other things that matter, but this realization was such a stunning finding, the invisible hand theorem, as it was called. It occupied the minds of economists. And some years after Adam Smith, in fact, roughly 100 years, you get Leon Walras writing down a system of general equilibrium where individuals are going about maximizing their own utilities and payoffs, and the economy is running. This is Walras giving mathematical shape to the broad ideas of Adam Smith. There was one big caveat in what Walras was doing. Walras described the equilibrium but could not demonstrate that the equilibrium exists. That turned out to be a very, very hard question with the amount of mathematics that we had at our command at that stage. So the next round of work that opened up was to try to prove that this equilibrium that we are describing, that we are analyzing, it exists in the first place. And that would happen, again, a little less than 100 years in the 1950s with the work of Arrow and Debreu. And along with the discovery of the existence of the general equilibrium came a very important theorem, which was a formalization of the idea of Adam Smith, that individuals going about their daily course leading to a Walrasian equilibrium also leads to optimality. Optimality in the sense of Pareto. Pareto optimality is what you get out of this. So the invisible hand now seems to have a theorem. But the way this was being described, ethics, honesty, integrity, concern for others play no role. And indeed, under certain assumptions, those things will play no role. But what are those assumptions? Those assumptions are under the carpet. What I have written about in recent times, several times, in popular writings, is that in any discipline, there are explicit assumptions which we write down as axioms. Human beings prefer more to less. If X is better than Y and Y is better than Z, then X is better than Z. Transitivity, convexity, concavity, etc. We write down these axioms explicitly. Occasionally, we will write that there are no externalities. But there are many other assumptions that we make without ever writing them down explicitly. They are so taken for granted that we don't even mention that. But occasionally, when those axioms which are taken for granted begin to go wrong, the economy can falter. And you will not be able to find what's causing it because none of your explicit axioms are being falsified. But an unwritten axiom is getting falsified. And history has a dramatic example of an unwritten axiom being discovered later. This is Euclidean geometry. I have always been fascinated by geometry, Euclidean geometry. To be able to write up a full discipline with axioms being laid out and then derive results out of that is a fascinating exercise, and Euclid did it. Euclid tried to write down all the axioms that he would need for his exercise, and he believed he did it, but there was one axiom, that at least one axiom, that Euclid made use of without ever writing it down as an axiom. Namely, that the entire Euclidean geometry was being done on a plane. So-called parallel postulate used that axiom, but that axiom was never written down. So, if you take the results of Euclidean geometry to a sphere, a surface which is a sphere, since the world is spherical, if you take the Euclidean geometry to the real world, Euclidean geometry will fail. It will begin to give you wrong results because the real world does not satisfy the implicit axiom, the axiom beneath the surface of Euclidean geometry. You need a new geometry for a spherical world, and very interestingly, these kinds of insights, you don't need a top theorist or a mathematician to get. It is true that the ultimate work on non-Euclidean geometry was done by Gauss, Riemann, and others, but The earliest thoughts and realizations came from Omar Khayyam, had a sense that Euclid was using an unwritten axiom. The German lawyer Schweikart, Ferdinand Schweikart, who was a lawyer who later became a mathematician, sensed that there was an unwritten axiom that was being used. He went and spoke to Gauss about it, that there was an unwritten axiom in Euclid. Likewise, in economics, there are unwritten axioms. And the unwritten axioms, we will need much more work and research to uncover them, but you have a sense of some of them, and I'll give you one example of it. This is the fact that we can communicate is crucial for exchange, trade, for the market to function. But while we write down axiom, transitivity axiom, complete preference, axiom, convex preference, etc., we never write down axiom, people can talk. That is taken for granted. Likewise, many moral behaviors are taken for granted that we don't write down. However, if those moral nuts and bolts of society begin to go wrong, your society is going to malfunction. I've got a beautiful quote from Ken Arrow. Let me read it out. Don't bother with the PowerPoint. It's there in the PowerPoint, but let me read it out. This is Ken Arrow writing in the magazine or the journal Dissent in 1978. And Ken Arrow, along with Gerard Debreu, does the founding work of formalizing Adam Smith's invisible hand. If you satisfy certain axioms, leaving everything to individual utility maximization will take society to its optimality. No mention of morality and ethics there. But here is Ken Arrow writing, the model laissez-faire world of total self-interest would not survive for 10 minutes. Its actual working depends upon an intricate network of reciprocal obligations, even among competing firms and individuals. Obligations and many other things. This is a long essay where Arrow goes on to talk about these. Those provide the nuts and bolts of society. We take them for granted, so we don't mention them, but they play a critical role. Years ago, I don't know if you remember, my early days in Delhi, I had written a paper which I'm very proud of. The paper hardly gets taken note of. It was published in Economic and Political Weekly. The paper, it's a paper with the longest title I have ever used, and it's the shortest paper I've written. So it's a very strange combination of title length and the length of the paper. The paper is, why do we not try to walk away without paying after a taxi ride? The question that would strike me is, after a taxi ride, it's very easy for you to open the door, jump out and walk away, especially if you're in a new city where you're not likely to see the taxi driver. But this is not true of just a taxi ride. In virtually every transaction, there is a moment's gap. There is some gap between one person handing over the money and the other person handing over the apple. So one person can run away. We don't do enough of that. Some people do that occasionally, but we don't do enough of that. Why is that so? And I was arguing, must be because these kinds of norms, these are ethical norms, moral norms, are hardwired into our head. And there can be differences across societies. In some societies, if I take something from you today and tell you I'll pay back 1 year later, I will do it because a promise is a promise. In another society, I will keep a promise. If I've just taken an apple, I will pay you just now, but I will not come back after 1 year to pay you. There are these differences. And these differences could make a difference in one society prospering and another society not prospering. And this is what took me into a big research agenda I had, and where I'm going to bring in a little bit of John Nash and show you how once you begin to recognize the importance of morality, some of also the intricate intellectual problems that arise with morality. I had a page, if you can show it, I would love it. It's a picture on my PowerPoint. There's a picture of Sanjay Bhattacharya. I don't know if you can. I think you're showing it now. Beautiful. Thank you. There's no reason to have it excepting to tell you that I'm going to just now be using a little bit of a Nash Equilibrium idea. And this is a painting by Sanjay Bhattacharya, the artist. Sanjay Bhattacharya is a student of Bikash Bhattacharya. And I don't know if you can see shades of that surrealism in this very simple sketch. When I was in Government of India, one of the things I feel very proud about, it was 50 years of Indian economic service. And I had got a couple of sketches made mainly for use in the government to give it to people. And John Nash was one of them. And it was done by Sanjay Bhattacharya. This particular picture, I should clarify, I took a photograph of the painting, and the reflection that you're seeing is a reflection caused by the frame and the cover of the frame. So that is not a part of Sanjay Bhattacharya's painting. But I thought that's adding an interesting dimension. So I've left it over there. I'm going to come back just now and address a very specific question. I know I'm not doing very well for time, but for me to take another 20-25 minutes, is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely all right. Yeah, you just take your time.
Yeah, okay. So what I did get concerned about after I started working on morality and economic functioning is there are these larger questions of general equilibrium and morality, and I think there's a lot of connection. Trust, the level of trust in a society does lead to higher growth. And the societies which have a greater amount of trust, people like Francis Fukuyama have written about it, casual observation from around the world, but there are also laboratory experiments done, groups of individuals who can trust one another better. In the laboratory experiments, they will be quickly making more money than other groups that don't trust one another. I should add, nothing in economics comes easy, nothing in fact in the world, in any science comes easy. Trust in general is good, but there are also vulnerabilities that arise with trust. A society that becomes very trusting, an outside mutant, someone coming from outside, can begin to take advantage of the trust that has evolved in this society. So many so-called primitive people and their societies have a lot of trust. And very often outsiders, the so-called civilized people, the so-called colonizers arrive, and then they begin to take advantage of the fact that these are very trusting people. You take advantage of that. So there are these risks involved. But if there is no outside infusion, risk of that, trust in general is an excellent quality which allows society to nurture and do well. My recent concern after I came back to academics and research, after my 7 years of interlude in the policy world, 3 years advising the Indian government and 4 years as chief economist of the World Bank, when I came back to academia, I was very absorbed with one question: group behavior. When a group behaves badly, who is responsible? How do you hold people responsible? I think this is a deep and intriguing question. The philosopher Joel Feinberg had a paper in 1968 or 69, I may be getting the exact year wrong, in the Journal of Philosophy, talking about it. And there is a lot of philosophical writing on group immoral behavior. See, we like to attribute responsibility to individuals. So as soon as a group behaves in a way that I don't like, I say, oh, X is responsible for it, or Y is responsible for this bad behavior of the group, or everybody in the group is responsible for it. So if we don't like what one country does, we hold every citizen of that country to be responsible for this. This is our propensity. But once you begin to dissect group behavior, moral behavior or immoral behavior, what the individuals do and what the group does, there can be huge big disconnects. I've got a beautiful quotation from Nietzsche in the PowerPoint. Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. There is a very famous line. People may have seen this before. where Friedrich Nietzsche is pointing out in individuals, insanity is rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule. In individuals, insanity is rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule. So individuals behaving well can lead, despite that, the group to behave badly. And I have to say that in this divisive world, where there is so much hatred, I at least try to tell myself that when a group behaves badly, we have to understand and not immediately begin to hold everyone in the group individually responsible for it, because yes, there is a sense of responsibility, but the connection between what the individual wants and what the group achieves can be very, very diametrically opposed. With that, let me give you, and from a recent paper of mine, I'm going to give you an example. This will need a little bit of careful handling with the PowerPointing, and for some reason, I'm not seeing my screen clearly, so I can't even see if you're showing it right, but let me tell you. If you can bring up the page which says the basic game on top and have it here. I think if I refresh my page, but I'm very worried I will lose you, so I'm not going to refresh my page. I think you've got it over there. Let me take a look and see. It's called the basic game, and it's a 3x3 game. No, it is before this. If you go before this, it's a game which has A, B, C on top and A, B, C along the columns and rows.
This is the first one. This is the first one you have sent.
Let me just see.
Slide. This is the first one.
Okay, and can you see, just tell me one thing. Do you see A, B, and C on the columns?
Yes.
And 102 in the first?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Oh, I've got it. Yeah. It's actually quite an interesting story, so I will make you explain this to you. What I got into this debate, where a whole lot of philosophers have contributed about group morality, group responsibility. I played around with it and I've created a game. I call this the Samaritan's Curse game. This is a game where it's not individuals are moral and the group is immoral. I'm going to do something else. I'll start with selfish individuals, then make the individuals moral individuals, and show you how the group will become less moral. The group's behavior becomes less moral. It's a kind of the prisoner's dilemma in the domain of morality. As the individuals convert into becoming moral, the group will become less moral. Okay. Now, so I'm just using the sheet in front of me. If you have a problem in what I'm referring to, then just stop me. Here is a game, two-person game. There are these two individuals who are very well off. They earn incomes of greater than 80, so use any measure. 80 could be 80,000 or whatever. So these are well-off individuals, and they are each of them two individuals choosing between A, B, and C. And if they both choose A, player 1 gets 102, player 2 gets 102. If player 1 chooses A, the player choosing the rows chooses A, and the player choosing the columns chooses C. AC is the outcome. Then player 1 gets $108 or rupees, whatever, and player 2 gets $108. That is the payoff matrix. In game theory, typically the most popular equilibrium concept that we use is the Nash Equilibrium, the picture that was just shown of John Nash. The Nash Equilibrium is widely used, and I've deliberately created a game where it's non-controversial. Virtually every equilibrium concept that you think of will coincide with the Nash equilibrium here. And moreover, there is only one Nash equilibrium, so there can't be any controversy about which equilibrium will you go to. Take a look at this payoff matrix. There is only one outcome where if both players choose that, no one can do better by individually deviating. So two players playing this game will settle down at that equilibrium. Let me just, I don't want to lose people on this. So let's pretend that both of them were choosing A. Both of them choose A. Can you see they will get $102 each? Why is that not Nash? Because one of them, player 1, can switch to B. If player 2 stays with A and player 1 switches to B, player 1 will get 120 instead of 102. So AA, where both of them get 102, is not an equilibrium. Is CC an equilibrium? Check it out. Both of them do better at CC. They get 106 each than what they're getting at BB. But if both of them are choosing C, if I unilaterally switch to A, I will do better. I'll get 108. So CC is not an equilibrium. This economy of two individuals will settle down at BB, where they will get 104 each. Standard game theory. In this case, it will be pretty non-controversial. I've rigged the game to make sure I don't get into the usual controversies of game theory. Now, here is the question I want to raise. Once you become a moral creature, one of the tenets of morality, and for me, that's the most important tenet. I don't adhere to any of the standard. I'm not referring to the morality that comes from religion. Well, though I have to emphasize, lots of religious leaders and individuals do have this kind of morality, which is the morality of compassion and kindness. Universal to human beings. You can be an atheist and still have that morality of compassion and kindness. Now, suppose seeing these two players playing this game, a Samaritan comes along and tells these players that, look, you're playing this game to maximize your own payoff. Shouldn't you do what Kenneth Arrow was urging? Pay a little bit of attention to what is happening to the bystander. So this is an unusual game where I'm going to now bring in a bystander. Someone else who's a very poor person who sits on the roadside and gets the fallout of what these people do. Or you can think of the bystander as the future generation. People who cannot hit back at us, but they get whatever we do, they get the benefits of that or the negative fallouts of that, the future generation. This is Greta Thunberg's concern, and this kind of a game I have in another context referred to as Greta's dilemma. Over here, what I'm presenting to you in my paper, I call it the Samaritan's curse. So now when the Samaritan says you should pay attention to the bystander, these two players say, well, up to now we didn't even know what was happening to others. So then once they become aware, they realize that there is one bystander. You can think of this as 100 bystanders, doesn't matter, who are very poor. They themselves do nothing. They get the fallout of what these two people do, and can be switched to the next PowerPoint where it is the current payoff with another payoff on the right-hand side, which is the bystander's payoff. I think you've got it there. Is it there? Just tell me. The basic game and bystander's payoff.
Yes.
Okay, good.
That's there.
Now, this is how you should read this game. On the left-hand side is exactly the game that we had, two players playing their own payoffs. On the right-hand side, it's the payoff of a bystander who does nothing. Either it's the future generation, much poorer than us, or someone on the roadside who depends on our activity, what we are doing, but who can do nothing. The payoffs of the bystander, you have to understand what they represent. What the bystander gets when the players do what the players do, the bystander does nothing. So if the two players choose A, the bystander gets a benefit of 20. If the two players do B, the bystander gets 6. If the two players do C, the bystander gets 4, etc. Now, what the good Samaritan comes and tells these two players is, look, you are playing selfishly, you're getting $104 each, you're very well off, and the bystander is getting 6. Be moral. If you were concerned about the bystander, and if you chose A instead of B, you would lose just $2 each, and you're so well off. And the bystander would get $20. The bystander would become much better off. You would lose $2. Learn to pay some attention to the well-being of the people who are affected by your actions. This is the morality of being concerned about the future generation, morality of being concerned about the bystander outside who gets affected by our behavior. Suppose the two players become moral, they turn moral. And by moral, I mean the following, which is actually a very natural kind of morality. When I become moral, I don't begin to get concerned about the amount of money and welfare that another rich person gets, but I begin to put some weight on the poor person's income. So I will take morality among these two rich players as to be the following. I will value my own dollars. I have selfishness, of course, in me, but I will also give some value to the dollars earned by the poor person. And to keep the arithmetic simple and the algebra simple, I give a value. $1 earned by a poor person is like a $1 earned by me. So what happens is, when both these players become moral, the payoff, the game that the two players are playing begins to change. And how does it change? Let me just explain, and then I will go to the next page. So don't change the page right now. Let me explain. Look at the basic game on the left-hand side. When both players become moral, and when you're playing A and the other player is playing A, you feel that the total payoff generated is 122, because you're valuing your own dollars, 102, but you're also valuing the dollars earned by the bystander. So AA is treated by you as 122, and the other player is moral also. The other player treats it as 122. Take, for instance, CC. If you now play CC, after you've become moral, your payoff is 110, 106, plus the bystander's welfare I am taking into account. 110, 110. So when the both players become moral, the basic game changes to a new game where the both players are now moral creatures. We can go to the next page. This is the Samaritan's curse. Are you seeing a game which says the Samaritan's curse, and the payoff in the top left-hand corner is 122, 122?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this has become the new game when both of them have become moral. And now with this new game, when you're moral and you're trying to maximize your moral payoff, your own utility plus the utility earned by the bystander, the new game is what you have in front of you, called the Samaritan's curse. And look at where this game will end up. Both individuals playing this game, two moral creatures. The Nash equilibrium in this game now is, it's very easy to check, is CC. That is, they will end up both of them choosing C, where the payoff is 110 each. What happens to the bystander? If you go to the next page, I've got the bystander's payoff also on the side. Let me see. I've got it here. Yeah.
Yes, we have.
You have it. And you can see the bystander, who was earlier earning 6, is now earning 4. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. So after the two players turn moral, the bystander, and they turn moral because both of them are paying attention to the bystander's payoff. The bystander becomes worse off. I call this the Samaritan's curse. After the individuals turn moral, the bystander becomes worse off. And in another context and in another paper, I argue that this problem arises with even environmentalists concerned about the future. If we just, each of us, act passionately about the future generation, in today's complicated world of complex interaction, we may make the future generation worse off. This is simply drawing attention to the fact that the moral intention is not good enough. Every exercise in our complex human world also entails intellectual engagement. To solve the problem of the world, you need kindness and compassion, but you also need hard thinking and analysis. And the paradox illustrated in this Samaritan's game is meant to alert you to the fact that just having good intention is not good enough. You have to think in terms of the architecture of how you do this. And I'm just looking at my time. I'm going to take another 10 minutes, and I want to talk about architecture and give you, I feel very excited about a recent work I've done. This is it's going to come out in the journal Synthèse, the philosophy journal, about, again, to do with group behavior. And then I want to talk about the importance of where we should go from here. Actually, just 3 days ago, there was a conference in Stockholm. Abhijit was also there at the conference. And there was some conversation about the kind of contract we need among human beings in order to create a better future. I want to talk a few minutes about that. See, when there is group interaction, there are fascinating problems that arise, which is a mixture of staring at the world. You have to stare at the world and try to understand the world and think. You don't need very much more than that. And one such problem, I'm speeding up a little bit, that I wanted to give you a glimpse of is when things turn sour in a country and the country is about to see a regime change. Take, for instance, what's happening in Belarus, or before that, what happened in Tunisia. In Tunisia in 2010, when the Jasmine Revolution started, there was an uprising in the country, rebellion in the country. It was bubbling over. At the end of 2010, I remember very strong statements coming from the leader Ben Ali, saying that everything is under control. Then in 2011, it erupts, and the Jasmine Revolution takes place, and Tunisia is a changed country. Look at Belarus today. Belarus came to a similar point, and then the revolt did not take place, and Lukashenko is strongly in place. What is the logic? Where does it succeed in one place and where does it fail? I think I have an insight. Using not complicated game theory at all. In fact, you need not know any game theory. But the logic of game theory and mechanism design can give you some insight into this. And here is this problem. Let me just very, very quickly try to tell you. Take a country like Belarus, 10 million people. Lukashenko has the probability of arresting and jailing 10 protesters. There is a limit to how many he can protest. So if all the people are out protesting against Lukashenko, the probability of each person being caught is 10 people can be put in jail, 10 million population. So 1 out of 1 million is the probability of being caught. Assume that that probability of being caught, 1 over 1 million, is so low that people don't mind revolting. So at first sight, it seems that this revolt is going to succeed, like the Jasmine Revolution of Tunisia. But there are structures of knowledge which can diffuse the revolt and the revolution. Suppose Lukashenko announces, which at first sight sounds completely innocuous, that, look, I want to be kind. I don't want to arrest anyone and everyone. If there are protesters, old people should have the sense. So I will arrest the 10 oldest people protesting and put them behind bars. At first sight, it seems, well, this won't stop the revolt. The young people will come in large numbers and the revolt will take place. But if this is a society where people's age happens to be common knowledge, everyone knows everyone's age, everyone knows that everyone knows everyone's age, and so on, then see what is going to happen. After this announcement, the 10 oldest people are not going to go out to revolt. If you're sure you're going to be put behind bars, the cost is too big. They don't go out. Since everyone knows everyone's age, everyone knows that the 10 oldest people, these 10 people are not going to revolt, then immediately the next 10 oldest people will not revolt because they know that they will be caught for sure. Since everyone knows what everyone knows what everyone knows, the next 10 people will not revolt, and the next 10 will not revolt, and no one will revolt. It goes through the ranks of society, and the streets of Minsk go empty. I feel broadly these kinds of logic play out in revolts taking place, in revolts not taking place, and this is a complicated argument because some revolts are desirable, some revolts are not desirable. There are revolts which ought to be controlled, and there are some revolts which ought not to be controlled. It's a complicated world and a complicated research agenda. Where do we go from here in this complicated world where games intertwine with our real life problems? My own feeling is what the world today needs is a minimal global contract, like a global constitution, that we adhere to, that we agree to. Certain kinds of behavior are wrong. Now, I was personally very excited when the United States took the lead in having the Democracy Summit, brought in the world leaders to talk in terms of how to enforce global democracy and keep the global democracy going. However, not enough came out of that, and I feel we have a collective agenda now. This sounds like a very idealistic agenda, but if you go back to the 19th century United States, when the American Constitution is being formed, it seems like an impossible task. Different states in the United States, different groups in India, they will not agree to a common constitution, but United States succeeded. India succeeded in a huge, fractious country. India succeeded. I feel the world is at a juncture where we need to think in terms of a minimal global constitution. Some rules that we all across the world, individuals, leaders, agree to abide by. It is not going to be easy, but it is not impossible either to have a constitution if you keep it to a minimal amount that we get into an agreement. And really, that fact that India today has a constitution is mind-boggling. The fact that the United States has a constitution is mind-boggling. And by that logic, even though it appears that it's mind-boggling having a constitution for the world, I think it's possible. It's not going to solve all our problems, but it can create some rules of the game where we are able to translate some of our intentions into a better world and a better society. So it's a huge, big research agenda, from tiny game theoretic problems to thinking about the world, but both, because it is a time of the world where the world is going topsy-turvy because of the rise in digital technology. It's changing the way we communicate with one another, with the kind of world that we live in. Given that that is what is happening today, we have an intellectual challenge of a kind that we last faced probably during the Industrial Revolution. We came out of the Industrial Revolution well, only because the Industrial Revolution also coincided with revolution in economics. From Adam Smith to Karl Marx, John Stuart Mill, powerful thinkers contributing to thinking about the economy helped us come out of the Industrial Revolution. We are at that kind of a juncture today with the digital technology, which can give great hope and better quality of life to us, but it also is a dangerous turning point for the world. For that, it is also a very exciting time for economists and social scientists, for anyone wanting to think, research, think about the world, and try to create a better world. And I go back once again to the days of sitting down with Dipak Da in his office in Presidency College, or with Nirmaladi and Dipak Da. Abhijit was very small at that time, at his home in Kolkata. Beautiful home with those red floors, which I remember so beautifully, thinking about these larger concerns, larger matters. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you.
Thanks a lot, Kaushik. Fascinating talk, as always. We have time for a few questions. Kaushik, can you see the chat box? I can see.
No, I have done something which I'm scared to refresh. I'm
Okay, I can read out the
very
question.
blurry, so you should read out to me. Ovidu, give me literally 1 moment to get myself half a glass of water.
Sure, please.
Half a minute for that while you read.
তিনটে দেখতে পাচ্ছি।
Yes, I'm back. You will have to give me the questions.
Yeah, the first question is from Amitava Gupta, Anandabazar Patrika.
Sure.
This is a political question, but I mean, you decide whether you want to answer it. Question is, if a country is ruled by a party whose driving force is hatred towards the other, the minorities in particular, in the case of present India, can there be a case for high social trust?
Can there be a
Case for high social trust?
Yeah. Oh, no, I'm very happy to answer this. You know, one of the things that has puzzled me, and these things again, once you get into these collective problems, it is not a question of pointing a finger at you're responsible for or you're responsible, but you do get, and it is true, that India, it has become divisive. I mean, I get troll attacks which occasionally take me aback, that people getting, I mean, I get attacked as a Bengali. I don't know why. This never used to happen in India. As soon as I say something slightly progressive, that we need greater equality, I'm attacked as a Bengali, which is very, very unusual. Now, it is happening. This has happened. This is being directed. My thing, which Amitabh was saying, what is, I feel, is a matter of concern, which is a concern not just for common people, but also for the leaders, is this thing which we do know from broad cross-country studies to laboratory experiments, that trust among groups is extremely important. Yesterday, actually, I was having a long conversation with my colleague Larry Bloom, who's done a lot of work on related matters. And we were saying that we as economists keep talking about the importance of fiscal policy, monetary policy, etc. And those are extremely important. And I should right now give a tribute to India's monetary policy. Reserve Bank of India, I think, is managing quite well, because it's a very precarious situation with exchange rates and inflation, but the Reserve Bank is doing a very good job. But that's not enough. Underneath the society, and I was earlier talking about these assumptions under the carpet, or assumptions in the woodwork. And this is the assumption there is a modicum of trust across societies. Once trust begins to erode, economic transactions begin to do worse. You know, I mean, very, very simple example. If it is common in a country for people to jump out of the taxi and run away, after some time, the taxi service will not exist in that country. Nothing is going to happen. You won't see anyone running away, because no taxi service will exist. So if these underlying conditions vanish, certain kinds of transactions don't take place in society. So I can't be sure about what's happening, but the fact that from 2016, India's growth each year has been less than the previous year's growth makes me worry that we ordinary citizens and leaders have to get together and say that, look, for the country today, it is important to rebuild trust across groups, across minorities, across majorities. You have to build that. It is an important agenda for India. Yeah.
Okay. The next question is from Narendra Pani. Question is, what would happen if morality was not just adding the interests of others, but a willingness to sacrifice a part of the player's interests?
Yeah. It's so wonderful to meet with people from long time ago. Hello to Narendra. So Narendra, that frankly is not going to change the paradoxical nature of the result. So let me explain. Good you asked this. I could have changed the game a little bit. I can't do it so quickly as to do it right away, but I can tell you that give me a little bit of time, I can do it, where you are willing to sacrifice a few of your dollars explicitly in order to get a little bit to the poor person. I believe everyone should be doing that. That's a morality I would encourage. But that morality in itself is not going to solve the problem. The design of how we interact with one another is important. So I'm not actually, I want to emphasize that the morality you talk about is an important morality. That is a backbone of society, and I do believe that we should all possess that. But that's not a sufficient condition. The architecture of how we interact with one another is important, and that's why I was talking in terms of a minimal constitution, which is a grand objective, but to move towards that is important. So the structure of the interaction is also something that we have to think in terms of influencing. Yeah.
Okay. Third question is from Bosundhara Chatterjee. For minimal global contract, what about the fact that different parts of the world have different needs? Won't it feel constricting for some countries with their needs not being met? So I guess she's saying different parts are different. So can we have a common global contract?
So Boshundhara, the common does not mean you're insensitive to the fact that different people have different needs. The common rules have to take into account. In fact, my hope is that once you think of the world as collectivity, your responsibility is not just to the poor people in your country. Your responsibility is also to the poverty that is in sub-Saharan Africa. So in fact, you become conscious of the needs for marginal groups elsewhere and create rules which will satisfy this. But since you're asking this question, let me just point out that we cannot be foolishly idealistic and say that it's all very easy. And I'll give you an example. We very often say that let each person practice what is each person's own norm. There are some norms which cannot be all practiced collectively. We can't look away from that. We have to sit down, talk, and say, you make this sacrifice and I'll make this sacrifice. And my example is very simple. Suppose there is a society that has got used to driving on the left. It's on an island. Everyone on that island drives on the left. There's another society where everyone lives on this island. They never go elsewhere. They drive on the right. Now let us say we get globalization. The people of these two islands come to live together. We cannot just say that let everyone continue to practice their own norms. The ones who like to drive on the left can drive on the left. The ones who like to drive on the right will drive on the right. No. Unfortunately, we will have to see that these two norms are not together compatible. We have to then think in terms of some rules and say maybe you will have to change, but the other group will make another sacrifice to make this possible. So once again, I'm stressing that what is the sort of general theme is that the moral part of it is important, but there is also an intellectual part of it, the design.
Okay, I can see a few more questions. How much time do we have till we have Mosumi?
We can continue at least for 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Professor Basu.
Okay.
Professor Basu, just one thing. Would you please stop presentation from your laptop?
Yeah, let me
I
try
think
and
the
do that.
situation would be better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let me do that. Correct.
Okay, so the next question.
Stop sharing.
Yeah. Tell me, what do I click and do it?
The upward arrow, you click on that box.
Okay. You know, my whole screen has become a mess. I don't know what caused it. So I'm doing
Okay.
things by seeing very little. Let me just take a
Maybe.
look. 1 second. Let me give me 1 moment, if I can. Should I click on the 3 dots?
Present now screen and stop presentation from there.
Yes. Once.
Yeah. This is the third from the right.
Third from the right.
Yeah.
There's
The box with the arrow.
box with the arrow. Okay. Did it work?
Now it's fine.
Perfect. Yeah. I'm scared to try to improve my screen because I don't want to switch the whole thing off. Okay. Right.
No problem.
Okay. Yeah, here is another question. If morality is what needs to be in spotlight today in economics, then how did communism, which focuses inherently on social justice, collapse within a century, while
Yeah.
capitalism continues to thrive?
You know, with communism, this is a good question. I feel communism was an intellectual failure, a massive intellectual failure. And let me explain. Some of the original ideals of communism, take for instance Karl Marx, talking about from each according to his ability and to each according to that person's need. To me, this is a marvelous line. It's a line that you associate with a spiritual leader. It is a line that you associate with an ethical leader. To each according to his need, from each according to his ability. That is what communism was founded on. But I have to say, the utter intellectual failure of communism is, having started from that, it tried to create a centralization of power in the hands of the government. And we saw that in the USSR, that in the last stages, when everything had been centralized, it got captured by a few people and it became a crony capitalist system. USSR converted from communism to crony capitalism, where there were a few people who owned virtually all the wealth in USSR effectively. And to think that you can bypass the laws of economics, to me, I get shocked at the utter intellectual failure of communism. And that I can say, even if you look at what happened in West Bengal when I was there, I knew many of the people involved. And I think that in terms of individual integrity, honesty, and concern, whole lot of very decent people that I knew. But they were making mistakes in terms of policies. And once again, it is this counterpart that to think that as soon as you're passionate about your objective, you'll get it done is not true. In fact, it can backfire. Okay. This is doing a recording by writing, which I'm trying to stop. Yeah. Okay, go ahead. You can.
So this question was from Pranjali Dangar. I just forgot to mention. The next question is from Shid Ganesh Anirudh Astri. This question is about the importance of the leader. If the leader is trustworthy, or if the leader follows and imposes strong morals, what would be the effect on the group? I mean, how important is leadership? I think that is the question.
Leadership is extremely important. And again, this is my cluster of work that I've been doing recently. I've actually been writing on the leader and the power of the leader. Where does it come from? The leadership is important, but you have to understand that leadership is a very mysterious kind of power. I now believe that the power of the leader, to understand that, you need to understand Thomas Schelling's almost mystical idea of the focal point. The leader is a person who creates focal points. So once the leader announces something, people expect everyone else will follow. and everyone expects everyone else will follow, and that becomes an equilibrium behavior on the part of individuals. So leaders play a very, very important role, from leading the country into a good state to misleading the country into a bad state. The leader has a very important role. And this is what had come up in the Stockholm conference 2 days ago that I referred to earlier, is that given the risks of the leadership going awry, you also do, that's again a reason why we have constitutions. A constitution is an earlier set of rules you set, putting bounds on what the leader can do. So the leader is extremely important, and the leadership, what leads to leadership, it's a big topic. I've actually got a paper on leadership, but yeah, I'm just stressing that it is an important topic, and the leader has a huge responsibility for what happens in society. But we as individuals also have a responsibility, because who becomes a leader is not chosen by the leader. We choose the leader. So, and this is the intricate thing that my paper goes into, that the leader's actions have a huge influence, but it's we who choose the leader. So once again, it's a mishmash of connectivity in society.
Next question is from Upanita Bormon. She wonders whether there is a contradiction between rationality and morality. How to prioritize morality over rationality? That's her question.
Yeah, that is at one level, that's the talk, that the center of my talk. My rationality, I was treating it pretty much rational behavior as what in neoclassical economics is known as rational. That you're concerned about your own welfare. And own welfare is defined also in terms of the money you have, in terms of the wealth you have. And you can make it a bit more general, saying that you're also concerned about your family, your household. That will still be household level rational behavior. You're doing things to maximize. And moral behavior, morality is a big topic. You can have, on the one hand, you have consequentialism. You judge the goodness or the badness of the action in terms of the effect it has on others. But moral behavior can also be what is called deontological ethics. Omerto Da, meaning Omerto Sen, has written a lot on deontological ethics and consequentialism. Deontological ethics is a moral rule. I will not tell a lie is a deontological ethic. No matter what the consequence, I will follow the rule that I will not tell a lie. I believe that there are situations where, to me, the consequentialism is more important than deontological ethics. You should think of the consequences of your action, and occasionally you should adopt deontological ethics, but for reasons of enlightened consequentialism.
Okay, so maybe we have time for one last question, and before that, I can see that Mihir Lokit says he liked the lecture very much. I should communicate that to you. So one last question: is there a difference between morality and ethics?
Just quickly to say, it is so wonderful to hear from Mihir. So wonderful to hear from Mihir. I haven't seen him in ages. The next time I'm in Kolkata, Mihir, I hope I will get to see you. Thank you very much. Your liking it means a lot to me. Morality and ethics, the way I'm talking about it, actually, I have kept the lines blurred. So I'm using the terms more or less interchangeably, because I'm using the word morality more in the sense in which people use the term ethics. Morality is very often associated with religiosity, religious beliefs, etc. And I'm not going into that at all. And I personally do believe that certain religious attitudes are good, ethically good. Certain religious attitudes are ethically bad. So I don't want to give a clean chit to that. But ethics and morality, if you by broadly, what I mean by that is other regarding preference, having concern for other human beings and other human beings, irrespective of their religion, caste, nationality. When you're concerned about someone else, you're concerned about someone else. This was, you don't have to look at philosophers, this was Rabindranath's philosophy. This is the philosophy uttered by a lot of humanists in the world, from M.N. Roy to Rabindranath. Coming into recent times, people have talked about this larger humanism. It's that kind of concern. But you also need, for a society to run, you need integrity. When you tell someone you will do something, you will do that thing, or you'll try your best to fulfill that. These are actually very useful for economic functioning. So economic functioning, for that to happen well, needs certain kinds of ethics, and certain kinds of ethics are ends in themselves. Let me say one more thing. Being an economist, I've been emphasizing that these models help society to do well economically. These models don't. My own belief is the moral commitment is prior. Whether or not that helps economic growth, morality, ethics, or in the sense in which I'm using, is a more important principle. Even if it damages growth a little bit, it's worthwhile taking that damage. But it also, certain kinds of morality and ethics actually helps growth. And to that extent, it becomes even more powerful. But the first principle is morality and ethics. The second is the fallout on economic growth.
So thank you very much, Kaushik. Mostly, is it time to stop?
Nirmaladi has raised her hand.
So
Nirmaladi, please.
Go ahead, Nirmaladi.
Now, I just wanted to thank Kaushik on behalf of our family that he gave this wonderful lecture, which I listened to with great interest. And I'm very glad it was possible in spite of all the difficulties that are going on. So thank you very much, Kaushik. And please give my regards to Alaka as well.
I'll do that, Nirmaladi, and I'll see you as soon as I'm in Kolkata next.
Thank you. Hope to see you. Bye.
So,
Abhijit Banerjee was also there in Google Meet. At this moment, he is not here.
Okay,
He was also there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Kaushik.
Thank you.
Wonderful to hear from you, as always. As I
Obiru, be well, and everybody just be well, safe.
Yeah. Right. We need to be well.
So at the end, formally, it's my pleasure to thank Professor Basu for his wonderful lecture. You have combined depth and simplicity to give us a thought-provoking lecture. I also thank Professor Sarkar for conducting this session. Professor Abhijit Banerjee has always helped us in conducting these lectures, while Nirmaladi has encouraged us in our endeavor. Lastly, all you have gathered from different parts of India and also places as distant as New South Wales, Cape Town, UK, and US. I thank you for attending tonight's session and hope you enjoyed it. We are very sorry that we could not accommodate all of you in the mid session. However, good night, everybody. And Professor Basu, next time আপনি যখন কলকাতায় আসবেন, প্লিজ প্রেসিডেন্সিতে এসে একটা ছোট ডিসকাশনও হবে।
খুব এনজয় করব, আই এনজয় দ্যাট, সো নিশ্চয়ই শিওর করব, ছাত্রছাত্রীদেরও মিট করতে চাই।
হ্যাঁ, yes.
ওকে।